Winning big in DFS, it's not easy, but I've brought together the thoughts of 6 experts who've won hundreds of thousands of dollars playing DFS on different sites to give you their secrets of success. Watch this video to the end and it will absolutely make you a better and more profitable DFS player. This is Fantasy Sanctuary. I'm Tom Strachan. Let's get into it. I've played DFS for nearly 10 years now, written about DFS and fantasy football for Fantasy Pros, Football Outsiders, Underdog Fantasy and more. The highs and lows of DFS, they are not easy, but I've leaned into the experience that I've gained and the advice of the experts in this video to become a more profitable player. We've got advice coming up from Pete Overzet, Millie Maker winner Neil Orfield, experts from Fantasy Points, Established to Run, and more. First of all, we're going to start with Adam Levitan of Established to Run, a man who is completely comfortable putting 5 figures of entry fees down regularly, who's won a lot in the double up and cash games, as well as $250,000 in FanDuel's Millie Maker contest. So he knows a few things about how to win big.
Best advice you can get for improving your expectation in DFS has nothing to do with players or stats or math or software or anything like that. It's just game selection. Which contest are you playing in? If you sign up for DraftKings and you play the Millie Maker every week, your baseline expectation is to lose and lose a lot, even if you are the best DFS player in the entire world. When you're going to look for contests, we want to be looking for smaller field contests, for single entry contests, for contests where 10th gets paid out 10% of first, where the rake isn't at the peak 16%. Maybe it's closer to 10 or 11%. We want to find games where there aren't a lot of pros and sophisticated players. We want to find games under $5 where people who have won $1 million or more can't play in those games on the sites. And so there's a million different things that you can do to improve your expectation. The easiest and fastest to me is being thoughtful about which contest you're actually playing in.
This is one of the biggest lessons that anyone should take away from this video because it really matters. I became a much more profitable DFS player when I stopped chucking entries at the Millie Maker. You know, that dream of beating 300,000 other players to win it massive. Instead, I focused on playing contests like the $27 Blindside, which is single entry. It only has about 3,000 entries per week. Yes, it's only $7,500 up top, but my odds of winning there are so much better when there's 1% of the contestants compared to the Millie Maker, and everyone just gets one single entry. In the Millie Maker, there's DFS professionals firing 150 lineups into that contest each week. Guys with huge bankrolls. Your chances of beating them is minimal. And look, if you want to try, if this is just some fun for you and you want to dream big, by all means, fire away. But if you want to be more profitable, more consistent, then look for the contests that are single entry or free max. I'm talking about contests like the $50 Red Zone, the $12 Fair Catch, the $8 Free Max Engage A, the $15 Free Max Screen Pass. These are all good contests. My favorite low stake contests that nobody talks about though. They're called Hundos. Only 10% rake. That's as low as it gets. Single entry, 15% of a prize pool up top. 10th place gets 20% of what first place gets. Nobody's getting rich on them, but these are really good bankroll builders, and I've had loads of success in them over the years. We'll get to the second piece of advice in just a second, but first, hit that like and subscribe button. We do DFS, we do best ball, we do dynasty, redraft, and underdog battle royale content here. Everything you need to win big in fantasy football. Next, we've got Chris Spags of Splash Play, Fantasy Points, and creator of the Probably app. Chris has had multiple 5-figure wins over the years, including hits for over 50K and 20K, and he has a really important point for building lineups.
If I were to tell you one of the biggest secrets of DFS would be this one thing, and it's that ownership, chalky ownership in particular, is not something to be afraid of. In fact, the reason most plays become chalky is number one, their top values in the slate relative to projection. Number two, there's some of the top projected players. Number three, there's some of the players in the best spots that we all expect to go off. And normally people go, oh, chalky ownership, I have to avoid this guy, I have to run away. The simulations out there, whether it be Stochastic, SaberSim, the Solver, whatever one you're using out there, they tend to show you over and over again. It's not about avoiding the chalk plays. It's about using them strategically. So if you have a highly owned RB, even 2 of them, you play a lower owned stack with that. If you have the chalk QB of the week, maybe you don't play his top receivers that everybody's going to play with that stack. You instead play 2 lesser guys or only 1 guy who's a little bit lesser owned. The point is about the overall lineup and how it comes together. It's about that some product of ownership rather than just having one guy with 25% ownership, two guys with 50% ownership. It doesn't even matter. Those guys can still hit. And again, they're getting so highly owned because they're good plays. So don't fade the good plays. Figure out how to play them more strategically, more uniquely. You get a lot better results for it. So that's my biggest DFS secret. Just embrace the ownership, or at least learn your way to work around it. That's all you can do for yourself across every DFS slate, every DFS sport.
Chris' advice is excellent because learn to deal with good chalk or bad chalk. It's massive. We talk about it in our members only Discord every week before the slate start. Fading bad chalk can be huge leverage, but learning how to build around good chalk is just as important. There's plenty of research out there that shows that winning lineups can often land around between 110% to 130% total ownership. But on weeks when a starting running back gets ruled out and you gifted a free square, like a 4K backup running back who's got to see huge volume, we have to adjust, because if they're good chalk and there's other good chalk on the slate, you could see lineups win tournaments with 140 to 160% total ownership, potentially even higher than that. And the flip side of this is that when bad chalk fails, we can see lineups as low as 60 to 80% total ownership win tournaments, depending on the contest size. Expanding on that point is Neil Orfield of the incredible YouTube channel, The Flannelverse, the oldest man to ever stream 150 best ball drafts. He puts out some great DFS content on his own channel. He also does work for Fantasy Points and 4for4, among others. Look, Neil knows how to win. He won the Millie Maker. He's won over 100K on 10 separate occasions in contests for NFL, NBA, MLB, and the XFL. Neil simply knows how to win in DFS.
Anybody playing DFS tournaments in 2024, I think, understands that you don't just want to play the chalkiest plays. Generally, if you can find some low-owned plays in your lineup, that's a good idea in DFS tournaments. I think the bigger issue that people have these days is actually losing sight of projections, just trying to find, all off-the-wall plays throughout your lineup. And I think that's a mistake. I think if every single player in your lineup is sub 5% owned, you're probably making the mistake of giving up too much in terms of projection. So I think finding that balance is something that people can lose sight of in 2024. I would say, as a general rule, if you're playing in a contest with under 1,000 entries in it, you should probably stay within 10 fantasy points of the optimal lineup in NFL DFS. If you're playing, 10,000 entries in a tournament, probably still stay within 15 points of the optimal, and something larger than that, even the largest, like Millie Maker contests, you still probably want to stay within 20 points or so of the optimal lineup. So that would be my suggestion. Just make sure you don't lose sight of projections when you're trying to find off-the-wall plays that are not getting a ton of ownership.
Neil's point is an excellent one. The way I build every week, it starts with trying to find the highest possible scoring lineup in points projections. Then I look at ways that I can be around that points total without it being an incredibly chalky lineup. Neil also makes the great point about adjusting for different contests. I promise you, if you're entering the same lineup into the Millie Maker as you use in smaller contests, the difference is going to be massive in your range of outcomes, and not all of them are good. We're going to come back to this point in a second, but first let's concentrate on ownership one more time, because Cody Main have established a run. Their Showdown and Niche Sport Expert has a really important point about it.
Understanding how to leverage ownership projections is probably the one DFS concept that can take a casual player and make him a more serious player. I think breaking it down into its simplest terms is the easiest way to drive home the importance of ownership projections and how to leverage those in DFS tournaments. Let's assume there's a contest that has 1,000 entries and a player that we are considering rostering is 5% owned. If that 5% owned player in this 1,000 entry contest provides a slate winning performance, that means we're competing with just 49 other players in that contest. 950 entries do not have access to that slate winning performance. What if that same player was 50% owned? If he was 50% owned in that contest and provided a slate winning performance, we're still competing with 499 other entries in this 1,000 person contest. Finding players who are lower owned than their counterparts is a great way to level up and a good way for us to funnel up leaderboards in DFS tournaments.
Cody knows all about getting up leaderboards in DFS tournaments. He recently won $200,000 on DraftKings. So combining Neil and Cody's points, we want to remember we need the low-owned players to give us leverage, but there's a balance to be had in not putting too many in for the simple sake of getting different. We should be picking and choosing carefully. My rule of thumb is I like to have 2 to 3 players rostered below 10% ownership, possibly one below 5% ownership as well, depending on the size of the contest that I'm attacking. And usually I'll try and correlate one of these low-owned guys to be part of my quarterback stack to further boost the leverage that I'm gaining from them. Jake Tribby of Fantasy Points is excellent at taking the data and stats and leveraging it for DFS purposes. He's kicked ass in Spring League football contests on DraftKings. He has a great feel for how to attack different contests. Here's his secret to success.
Hey guys, Jake Tribby here from Fantasy Points to talk about DFS correlation for tournaments. We all know it's important to correlate your DFS teams, but not everyone knows that the amount of correlation should change depending on the contest you are in. You can view correlation as a dial you can turn based on contest sizing. I generally prefer to increase my lineup's correlation in smaller field tournaments and decrease it a bit in larger field tournaments. You don't need a truly optimal score to win a 500 entry contest. Because the winning scores are lower, we are simply trying to reduce the total number of things we need to get right. And something like a triple stack with a bring back easily emphasizes that concept. If an offense goes off for 45 points and you played their quarterback, running back, wide receiver 1, and wide receiver 2, plus a wide receiver from the opponent that scored 25 points while playing catch up, you're almost certainly looking at a great score for your overall team. That said, in tournaments with hundreds of thousands of entries, the winning score will be far closer to a perfect team than in smaller fields. So while you still want to correlate in those contests, you don't need to lean as heavily into game stacks or team stacks as you would in a smaller field contest.
Jake's point, it matters so much because, as we've touched on already, lineups that win the Millie Maker look incredibly different to those that win single entry or 3-max competitions. The Millie Maker teams, they have to hit on unicorn outcomes with players in lineups that most sane-minded people don't even consider playing. So Jake's point revolves around stacking and playing more players from a single game. When I'm playing smaller field contests, those below 1,000 entries, and particularly those below 500 entries, I'm happy to onslaught, like Jake mentions, having 4 or 5 players from the same game all in one lineup. But I'm playing those massive field contests. That's the last thing I want to do, and you want to be looking at those skinnier stacks. Further to Jake's point, if you want to start understanding what wins big in DFS, one of the key things you can do is to go into the contest that you've entered after they've finished and look at what the winning lineups did. Look at how many stacks they had. Look at the top 10 entries. If you want to be up there in the top 10 entries, start studying them. Make 2 or 3 notes a week, and then over the course of a few weeks, you're going to start seeing patterns emerge, and that's what you should be honing in on. Pete Overzet of the Deposit Kingdom has been on a heater lately with multiple big wins in the last few weeks, and he took the point on correlation and stacking even further.
Hi, I'm Pete Overzet, a DFS bro. You can find my stuff at youtube.com/PeterOverzet. And my piece of advice for new DFS players centers around bringbacks and correlation. For those of you not familiar, bringbacks just mean adding a player from the same game opposite your main stack. And my thought here is that in smaller contests, let's say smaller than 10,000 entries, people are using bringbacks too much. It's cozy. It feels comfy to have a bringback. But then in super large field contests like the Millionaire Maker, the field isn't utilizing them enough. And the data behind this thought was put together by Justin Freeman from Run the Sims. And he did a study where he found that bringbacks were useful when an opposing quarterback scored more than 30 points. And in those scenarios, the bringbacks outscored their projection by 5 points at a nearly 10% higher clip. And what this means is that if there's a truly wild game, think that Texans-Bucks games from last year, you're going to want pieces from both sides because everyone's scoring. But those games only happen a handful of times a season. And so most of the time in the smaller contests, you just want to bet on a single offense because when you're doing that, you're only having to get one thing right as opposed to getting multiple things right. One offense, a second offense, the entire game going crazy. It ends up being a longer parlay that you're having to hit. So my TLDR here, chase those unicorn game stacks in the millie, but stay focused on team level correlation in the smaller contests.
I'm definitely guilty of using bringbacks too often over the last few years, assuming a game can shoot out massively and everyone can get there. Now, I'm trying to be more particular with my stacks, considering the game script. If you're playing a Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce stack, you might not need the bringback because the Chiefs' defense, it's good enough to suffocate their opponents. Now, if you're stacking Lamar Jackson and Zay Flowers, it could pay off to have a bringback because the Ravens' defense is a complete dumpster fire and they're giving up points to everyone. I'm not mad. do not put it in the paper that I'm mad about the Ravens defense. So be mindful of the matchup. I spent a lot of time putting together matchup data and game previews for our Discord members to give them the keys to this sort of success, to find out which games they want to target bringbacks and which games it's just a case of going, we'll just take that player and we'll leave the rest alone. You can join our Discord by hitting the join button down below. DFS, Dynasty, loads of premium content in there. Let's recap these points, though, and put it all together. 1. Contest selection matters. 2. Don't be afraid of chalk, but balance it with low-owned players. 3. Leverage ownership against the field. 4. Understand the contest size that you're playing in and the amount of correlation that you need to win big. 5. Don't force bringbacks where you don't need to. What do you think is the key to winning big in DFS? Let me know in the comments below. These experts, we all know a huge amount about winning, and you should absolutely be checking out the links to their work in the description below. I'm a huge fan of their work. Check it out very often, and you should be as well. Hit the subscribe button. We do Dynasty, we do DFS, we do Redraft, we do Best Ball. All we want to do is help you win, and we've got year-round content with that aim.